What happened next would become one of the darkest moments in history. The little piglets did grunt. Within a year, Ragnar's sons Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye would assemble the great heathen army of 865 AD, the largest Viking force ever to invade England. They landed in East Anglia with thousands of men and dozens of ships, driven by a single purpose: to burn Northumbria to the ground and kill King La for what he had done to their father. But he had no idea what was coming. Before Ragnar ever faced the snakes, before he led the raids that terrorized France and England, before he married the warrior queen Lagertha or saved Thora from a giant serpent, he was just a boy destined to become the most feared Viking in history. And his first death so horrifying that even his enemies remembered it for centuries would set the entire story in motion. The mist clung to the fjords of Sweden in the early years of the 9th century, around 815 AD, where a child was born to King Sigurd Ring and Princess Alfhild. According to an obscure Icelandic text called Fragment of a Saga about certain ancient kings, Ragnar was the biggest and fairest of men that human eyes have seen, and he was like his mother in appearance and took after her kin. Whether this truly happened remains unknown. The sagas were written 350 years after his supposed death by skalds in Iceland who had heard the stories from generations of oral tradition. His lineage is said to trace back to the realm of gods, blending mythical origins with historical reality. As the son of the Swedish king, Ragnar was destined for greatness from birth. His destiny intertwined with the fate of his people and the course of Viking history. But what sets Ragnar apart from his contemporaries is not just his birthright, but his unmatched ambition and strategic brilliance. He emerged as a warrior of exceptional skill, navigating the treacherous waters of Viking politics and warfare with equal dexterity. According to the Norse sagas, Ragnar had 3 wives. The first was the famed shield maiden Lagertha, a woman so fierce that she would later become a queen herself. Legends tell us that Ragnar married her after watching her fight off her own father's attackers with nothing but a spear and sheer determination. He impressed her by climbing a fence bare-handed while she was in the middle of battle, proving his courage and agility. His fears were real. He doubted whether he could ever be as great as his father. His ambitions burned brighter than any fire in the Viking halls. He wanted to carve a legacy that would echo through the ages, and he would sacrifice everything to achieve it. Lagertha bore him no children. The second wife was Thora Borgarjord, whose affections he won by saving her from a giant snake that guarded her father's castle. According to Saxo's legendary history, Ragnar dressed in a worm-skin outfit and crawled through the beast's mouth, killing it with his spear. He returned to Thora with the snake's head, and her father gave her to him in marriage. But Thora, too, died, and Ragnar was left alone once more. Then came Aslog, although she was referred to as Kraka or Krabba in the Icelandic sagas. She was the daughter of the legendary hero Sigurd Fafnisbane and the Valkyrie Brynhild, meaning Ragnar's third wife was literally descended from gods and heroes. One 12th century work by Christian Danish chronicler Saxo Grammaticus mentions a fourth wife, but is the sole source to do so. It was his third wife who bore him the equally legendary Vikings Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye. They would go on to lead the great heathen army that invaded England in 865 AD. The consequences would be far worse than anyone imagined. The storms of the North Sea were not the only dangers Ragnar faced. In the 840s AD, he set sail for the British Isles with a small fleet, striking fear into the hearts of coastal villages. Tales of his daring exploits, such as the sack of Paris and his encounters with Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, have been immortalized in sagas and chronicles. According to traditional literature, Ragnar distinguished himself by conducting many raids against the British Isles and the Carolingian Empire during the 9th century. He led invasions against Paris, defeated armies, and amassed riches like a king of the seas. But his legend was born not only from victories. It was born from betrayal, from death, from the choices that would haunt him forever. In 845 AD, Ragnar sailed up the Seine to besiege Paris. The city was defenseless, its walls crumbling, its people terrified. He burned the suburbs, took thousands prisoner, and demanded a massive ransom. Charles the Bald, the Frankish king, paid him 7,000 livres of silver, an enormous sum at the time, roughly equivalent to 2.5 tons. Having then been paid off, Frankish chronicles duly recorded the death of Ragnar and his men in what was described as an act of divine retribution. This may well have been a case of Christian proselytism. As the Saxo Grammaticus contends, Ragnar was not slain, but in fact went on to terrorize the shores of Ireland in 851 AD and established a settlement not far from Dublin. But the next challenge would test him like never before. Ragnar had set sail for England with only 2 ships in tow in order to conquer the land and prove himself better than his sons. He wanted to show them that he was still the greatest warrior of his age. But this decision would change everything. The land of Northumbria was cold and barren, its fields frozen, its people hardened by survival. King La ruled from a stone fortress, his armies loyal, his name feared. When Ragnar's 2 ships appear on the horizon, La does not hesitate. He gathers thousands of men and launches a surprise attack. Ragnar was overwhelmed by the forces of King Aella of Northumbria. He was captured, dragged before the king, and sentenced to die in the most brutal way possible. According to Saxo's legendary history, Ragnar was eventually captured by the Anglo-Saxon king Ella of Northumbria and thrown into a snake pit to die. This death became the most famous event of his story, the emotional center that would haunt generations. But he had no idea what was coming. The pit was deep, its walls lined with razor-sharp stones. At the bottom, dozens of snakes writhed in the darkness, their scales cold, their eyes glowing with hunger. Ragnar was thrown in naked, his body exposed, his fate sealed. The snakes began to bite immediately, their venom spreading through his veins. Yet Ragnar did not scream. He did not beg. He stood in the center of the pit, his body already bleeding, his mind clear. And he spoke the words that would become legend, how the little piglets would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffers. Whether this truly happened remains unknown. The sagas were written centuries later, but the image is so powerful, so brutal, so Viking, that it has become the defining moment of his entire story. The next challenge would test him like never before because his sons would not let this death go unpunished. The news reached Ivar the Boneless in the winter of 865 AD. His father had died, not in battle, not in glory, but in a pit of snakes, eaten by creatures while a king watched from above. Ivar was not like his brothers. He was thin, his legs twisted, unable to walk without support. But his mind was sharper than any sword. He was the strategist, the planner, the one who would turn grief into war. Bjorn Ironside was the opposite. Massive, fearless, a warrior who led from the front. Sigurd Snake in the Eye had the mark of a snake around his eye, a birthmark that convinced everyone he was destined for greatness. Together, they would assemble the great Heathen army, the largest Viking force ever to invade England. Thousands of men, dozens of ships, a unified front that would burn Northumbria to the ground. They landed in East Anglia in 865 AD, leading to almost 2 centuries of Norse occupation in the east and north of England. Their father's death prompted the trio to rouse the great Heathen army and form a unified front with other Vikings. They would kill King La. They would burn his cities. They would make England pay for what he had done. But he had no idea what was coming. The evidence to suggest Ragnar ever lived is scarce. But, crucially, it does exist. 2 references to a particularly eminent Viking raider in 840 AD appear in the generally reliable Anglo-Saxon chronicle, which speaks of Ragnar and Reginherises. In the same way that Ivar the Boneless and Imr of Dublin are considered the same person, Ragnar and Reginheris are believed to be Ragnar Lothbrok. It is said that this infamous Viking warlord raided the coasts of France and England and was duly given land in a monastery by Charles the Bald, before betraying the covenant and sailing up the Seine to besiege Paris. However, while Ragnar's relationship with King Ella is likely fabricated, his relationship with his sons may not have been. Of his sons, significantly more evidence exists as to their authenticity. Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, and Bjorn Ironside are all genuine figures in history. Intriguingly, though the Icelandic sagas that detail Ragnar's life are often considered inaccurate, many of his sons lived in the right places at the right times to match the deeds mentioned, and indeed, his sons claim to be the offspring of Ragnar himself. It would seem, therefore, that his death at the hands of Alla in a pit of snakes has its roots in myth rather than history, for it seems probable that Ragnar perished sometime between 852 AD and 856 AD during his travels across the Irish Sea, so much so that the sagas of Ragnar Lothbrok became a conflation of many Norse tales and adventures, and the real Ragnar soon lost his place in history and was adopted wholeheartedly by the realm of mythology. Whether fact, fiction, or myth, the story of Ragnar Lothbrok is the stuff of legend. History's most famous Viking wore many crowns: father of the great heathen army, husband to a mythical warrior queen, king of Sweden and Denmark, and the scourge of Anglo-Saxon England. Debate and doubt rages on to this day about his true existence. Separating fact from fiction is all but impossible. Yet what we know about Ragnar, saga, truth, or myth, is that he earned his place as one of history's most brutal, successful, and fearless warriors. The final scene is not in the pit. It is years later, on a battlefield in Northumbria. Ivar the Boneless, standing on his chariot, watches as King La is dragged before him. The king is broken, his armor shattered, his face bleeding. Ivar does not speak. He gestures to his men. They cut La's throat. They bleed him out in the ritual known as the Blood Eagle, a sacrifice to Odin for their father's death, and the old boar's legacy lives. The sun sets over the North Sea. 7 longships sail into the darkness, their sails torn, their men silent. The camera pans to the horizon, where the first light of dawn breaks. Ragnar Lothbrok is gone, but his sons have taken his place, and the great heathen army will never stop.